What's going on, everyone? It is going to be a pretty good day today because we've got approximately 1.5 million cards to go over. It's been a busy couple of days and a massive surge of first order units, which is not something that I was necessarily expecting. But we're not going to waste any time because we got a lot of cards to talk about today. A big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and also I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to check it out for all your Star Wars Limited card needs. Let's dive into our first one with one of the best units for the first order in PHASMA. This is a 5-cost ground unit in command ability. It's a 5/6 first order trooper, and when played and on attack, you may give another first order unit +2/+2 for this phase. Now, it's important to note that it says another, so you cannot give it to itself, but it is a 5-resource 5/6, so good kind of starting stats. 5/6 is pretty much like average, what you were kind of wanting. 6/6s are awesome, 5/7s are awesome, that type of stuff, but 11 points of stats is pretty good for the most part. We have to have first order units though, because a 5-resource 5/6 is not good enough. A 5-resource 5/6 that gives you +2/+2 when it comes into play, now we're kind of talking. And we have the potential to ECL this out. Now, it only will ambush for 5, but that's usually a good amount. And you could potentially give +4/+4 spread across 2 different bodies when you ECL this out. Now, I think this is more just, I'm going to play it in my first order curve, and then I'll get +2/+2 on something. And then I'll be able to attack for a large chunk, and I'll progress the board. And then next turn, they're kind of forced to deal with this. Otherwise, if I get an attack in, I'm attacking their base for 5, and I'm getting +2/+2 again to another first order unit. That can stack up insanely quickly. But the biggest problem and the biggest limiting factor is the fact that it has to be other first order units. If I take a look here, I believe we are sitting at like 4 or 5 first order units already that have been either revealed besides today's video or in the game already. We have Kylo Ren and Snoke. Those ones are pretty easy because they've been in the game for a long time. Kylo Ren is amazing, by the way. That is an amazing first order unit. So, okay, don't mind Kylo Ren. Snoke, also pretty good. Probably won't fit in this style of deck, but I could see Kylo Ren fitting in a Phasma deck. We have the Silencer, which is also first order, so that would fit perfectly within this style. And then we have a couple of new ones that have already been revealed. I believe Pride, the first order Stormtrooper, which was revealed the other day with the indirect damage. And I believe there's a couple more that I'm missing off the top of my head, but we don't have enough right now to make Phasma really work, because you're not going to have a first order unit most of the time when she comes down. And that means she's a 5-resource 5/6. So can we curve out into her? We will find out with some more cards. Next up, though, we got Moff Gideon. It's a 4-cost ground unit in Cunning Villainy. It's a 5/4. And it says when this unit deals combat damage to an opponent's base, each unit that opponent plays this phase costs 1 more. A very interesting style of ability. So first off, it's a 4-resource 5/4, which is a good stat line. 4/5s is pretty common. 5/4s is less common. This is definitely a more aggressively statted unit. It does have the Imperial tag, which could be relevant. It does have the official tag, which also could be relevant. But is this ability to basically push your opponent's units back even further impactful? And I'll have to say, I don't know if it's worth like diving into specifically Moff Gideon for this, but there is a really powerful effect here, especially if you have the initiative. If you have the initiative and you attack and your opponent's on that Luke Skywalker turn, or heck, they're on the Poe Dameron turn, like if you're playing against Sabine and you have the initiative and you're able to stall out that Poe Dameron deploy by 1 turn, that can be a game winner. Just by getting that 1 extra turn so they don't get Poe Dameron down. Or, and this is pretty important, we could see a situation where you completely mess up an opponent's curve because that's the only unit they have, and now it costs 1 more, which means they can't do anything. But you also must deal combat damage to an opponent's base to do this. And that is pretty limiting because, yeah, sure, they can't play Poe Dameron in Sabine Green now if you hit their base, but you're hitting their base and not controlling the board, and you're probably losing because of that. So I don't know how strong Moff Gideon's really going to be. I think this is an interesting ability, and he has a decent stat line, so I wouldn't be surprised if people are playing him. but nothing like insane for me here. Next up, we've got the First Order TIE Fighter. So another First Order unit. We got a 1-cost space unit in command villainy. It's a 2/1 with raid 1 as long as you control a token unit, and it has that First Order tag. Now, this is in the set with the token TIE Wings and the token X-Wings, so it's very possible you will have a token unit, but a 1-resource 2/1 in space is kind of, well, mediocre. TIE Fighter existed in the game for a while, like actually actively in a lot of decks. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this does see play, just because the token unit could make it into a 3/1, which kind of interesting, maybe. It is a 3/1 though, so it'll die to basically everything. Pings are pretty common, so at least in the meta right now, I don't see this being played. And also, it's not always you're going to have a token unit. It's really all about that First Order tag, and I don't think this is going to be one worthy of trying to curve out with First Order. But we have another First Order, and this one's a leader, and it's a leader Phasma. So this one is, if you played a First Order card this phase, deal 1 damage to a base. So very aggressively positioned leader. This is kind of like a Sabine, right? You just get guaranteed damage to your opponent's base. And it's one-sided. You do have to play First Order cards, but if you saw Sabine's action, and it was action, if you played a Rebel unit this phase, deal 1 damage to a base, I think that'd be better than Sabine's action in a lot of situations, because there's just so many Rebel units in that deck that it's very common that you'll get that off every single turn. It's not always that it's going to be better. Like in the later stages of the game, you're going to have less Rebel units in Sabine, so it'll be worse. And in Phasma, there's situations where you probably won't get down a First Order card, especially if you're playing command. There's probably like overwhelming barrage turns, things like that, but has potential for sure. And then we have a flip where on attack, if you played another First Order unit card this phase, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. If you do, deal 1 damage to a base, and it is a 4/6. So 4/6 is a pretty nice stat line. 1 damage to a unit and 1 damage to a base isn't too bad. I think this has potential. This definitely has potential for me. It's really all about First Order, and can you get enough First Order units? We saw Phasma as a unit, and it looks like it's going to be basically First Order has to be command aggression if you're trying to make it work, because a lot of the other cards like Silencer, Ren, Pride are all aggression. The Phasma is command. The card we just saw is also command. So you're kind of locked in right now. But aggression, villainy, command is a good combination. So that's not too bad to be locked in. And this has a nice stat line. It's pretty aggressive in terms of abilities. It does a lot of damage, and this definitely has potential to lead and a very aggressive First Order deck into the field. But again, as I said, with the Phasma unit, we need more First Order units. We need a good package at 1 to 2 costs, or turn 1/turn 2. Okay. 2 resource, 3 resource. That's why Sabine is so strong. Next up, we've got General Hux. So here is our first really quite interesting First Order unit for me. That's a little bit cheaper, and that is a 2-cost ground unit in aggression villainy. We've got a 1/4 First Order official. Each other friendly First Order unit gains raid 1 and action. If you played a First Order card this phase, draw a card. So this one is interesting because I like the 1/4, or rather, I like the toughness he has. I like the fact that you're buffing up your other First Order, and I like the fact that you get some value out of playing First Order cards. But, and this is the key, when you're looking at Phasma, when you're looking at both the unit and the leader, we're looking to be aggressive. We're looking to maybe trade up on units. We're looking to maybe get in some damage. We're looking to deal direct damage. I'm not sure Hux really provides that for you, because you need to have other units for Hux to be good. And if you don't, then he's just a 1/4 that maybe will draw you a card. And that's not usually what aggressive decks want to be doing. If you do have a bunch of other units, then it's still a 1/4. So you'd have to get like 2 other First Order units to attack. At least 2 other features to attack overall throughout the game in order to get +2 damage with Hux. And that means that Hux is still around. So every single turn that Hux attacks into the base, or draws a card, you're missing out on a portion of damage, and you need to make up that damage that you would have done with like a 2 or 3 powered unit with his first ability if you're playing that aggressive deck generally. And I just don't see that doing that much. Maybe there's some more mid-range style of First Order deck, but not from what we've seen so far. Next up, we've got Special Forces TIE Fighter. It's a 2-cost space unit aggression villainy. It's a 2/3, and when played, if an opponent controls more space units than you get to ready this unit. This one actually looks pretty interesting to me. I could definitely see this being played in a first order deck. 2/3 in space, totally reasonable. You see Cartel Spacers, you see Arc 170s, you see Inferno 4s. So 2/3, totally fine stat line. Opponent controlling more space units and readying this immediately could be really relevant for later on in the game. But most importantly, it's just another turn 1 option you have that's totally reasonable to play. And that's exactly what you want with PHASMA unit and PHASMA leader. And just first order, it seems like just wants a bunch of units on the board in general. So this one doesn't really have much to say about it because I think it's actually pretty good. And it's a 2/3. That's what you want. Next up, and this one's a little bit hard to see. Let me zoom in a little bit here. We got Turbo Laser Salvo. So this is a 7-cost event. You choose an arena. A friendly space unit deals damage equal to its power to each enemy unit in that arena. So this is pretty interesting. So you basically, if you control a space unit, can choose to have that space unit hit everything in the space arena or everything in the ground arena. I don't know how strong this is because what this requires you to have is a pretty beefed up space unit, right? If you have like a 3 or 4 powered space unit, then you're basically playing Bombing Run, and we know how kind of unimpactful Bombing Run has been. So you're going to need a big unit. So if you're thinking about like Piet, you can get a Quinton's Assault Cruiser down on the previous turn for 6 resources. Then you can curve into Turbo Laser Salvo. Maybe there's something there. I think outside of that deck, I mean, you're just not going to have enough space units that are beefy enough to really take advantage of Turbo Laser Salvo. And mind you, we're 1 resource away from Super Laser Blast. And Super Laser Blast is significantly better than what Turbo Laser Salvo can generally do. I mean, obviously in the rare circumstance where you have the only space and your opponent only has ground units, you get to keep your unit and kill other units for 1 resource less than Super Laser Blast. That's obviously amazing. That's not really going to happen, right? So I'm not really sure about this card. And if you're setting up for this and your opponent waylays something on the previous turn, it's over. It's over. Next up, we've got Ahsoka Tano. This one's pretty sweet. We got a 4-cost ground unit in Cunning Heroism. It's a 3/5 with the Force tag. When played, an opponent discards a card from their hand. If it's a unit, you may exhaust a unit. So 4-cost 3/5, we've seen this like Kira, for example. It has a disruptive element. You force your opponent to discard a card, which is nice. And you could potentially get an exhaust out of it if your opponent's only has a bunch of units around. So this can really do some decent work. I actually think this card is pretty good. I think that the potential to disrupt your opponent's hand just by getting rid of cards is pretty nice. And against some decks, it'll mean a lot more, like Han Yellow, for example. Getting rid of just a card can really disrupt their overall plan. There's not really too much to say about this. It is that disruptive element that you're looking at. Is this going to compete with Kira? I don't know. I don't know if Kira is really, or rather, I don't know if Ahsoka is really strong enough to do what Kira does. Because what Kira does gives you that selection. You're able to peek at their hand and then choose the thing that really disrupts them the most. Whereas Ahsoka, your opponent has the choice to disrupt them the least. And that can be less impactful. Next up, we've got Profundity. This one is a 9-cost space unit in Aggression Heroes. And we got an 8/9 Rebel Vehicle Capital Ship. It's got Overwhelm. It's got when played and when defeated, choose a player. They discard a card from their hand. Then if they have more cards in their hand, they discard another card. So essentially, when it comes down, your opponent discards a card. If they still have more cards in hand, then they discard 2 cards. If this thing dies, you just do that same thing over again. I think this card is pretty mediocre. A 9-cost space unit as an 8/9 that doesn't do anything really impactful when it comes down is not good enough. The stat line just isn't insane. The when played isn't insane. The when defeated isn't insane. Like if you're discarding 2 cards with this, you're in trouble probably. I suppose this could be the last card in your hand and they've kept their hand. Like let's say you're at like turn 12 or whatever. Your opponent's completely empty-handed. So are you. You start your turn. You draw 2 cards. You resource one of them, and the other one's a Profundity. And so you just Profundity. You're able to discard your opponent's entire hand. Like maybe something like that could happen, right? That is something. And It's just 9-drop. It's a 9-drop. 9-drops have to be really good. Like, this is directly competing for Crate Dragon as a finisher. And I don't know how you're going to compete with Crate Dragon, to be honest. But Profundity. Next up, we've got Mist Hunters. This is a 3/4 for 3 in Cunning Villainy. It's underworld vehicle transport. And on attack, if you played a Bounty Hunter or Pilot card, you may draw a card. So, I mean, it's a 3-cost 3/4 in space, which isn't bad. But it is a pretty weak on attack trigger. And it's also an on attack trigger. So you might draw a card or two off this, which is okay. But you're going to need to sequence your plays before you attack. And it's still just a 3-resource 3/4. Like, it's not terrible because of that. It's like a decent stat line. But would you rather have this over like Punishing One? Generally not. Like, these space decks aren't grinding you out with card advantage. You usually have a ton of cards to be able to play because Triple Dark Raid is something you play, you know, kind of in that middle stage of the game and late game. And guess what? It bounced that card back to your hand, allowing you to use up your resources the following turn. So Mist Hunter, I just don't really see a huge reason to play this. It is a transport, I suppose. So that's something, but I just don't really see this being all that insane. Next up, we've got Frisk. It's a 2-cost ground unit, 3/2, and it's got piloting for 2, aggression, heroism, just like its normal aspect. And it says, when playing as an upgrade, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less and get +2/+2. So defeating an upgrade that costs 2 or less is going to be pretty rare. You have a few pilots that can be defeated that way. You've got the tokens, so shield tokens, experience tokens. So I guess I shouldn't say rare, but the value of this isn't going to be insanely high. It's just going to be a little bit extra on top of the +2/+2. So I'll say, if you're able to take advantage of the +2/+2 pilot factor of this, it's not too bad. And the fact that it's a 3/2 as a ground unit, you know, eliminates some of that concern, because playing this as a turn 1 play isn't too bad. Not too bad at all. So that has something going for it. But I really find that you'll need to play these as pilots to get massive use out of them. And there is potential, but I haven't seen that many aggression heroism pilot decks as much as I have seen like command cunning. So we'll see with Frisk. Next up, we've got Fight Fire with Fire. It's a 1-cost event in aggression. Choose a friendly unit and an enemy unit in the same arena. You deal 3 damage to each of them. So a nice, interesting symmetrical removal option for the most part. Well, in terms of damage, this looks like it's a Thrawn contributor, right? Early game removal coupled with the fact that you can hit your own when defeated triggers can be pretty interesting. We've seen these types of effects with like Merciless Contest. Now, Merciless Contest has been pretty good, but that defeats the enemy unit. It's not just 3 damage. However, Merciless Contest is 2 resources more expensive. So I do think this has potential. I think it's more of you need to figure out what deck you are playing. And another important factor of this is Merciless Contest doesn't require you to choose a friendly unit and an enemy unit in the same arena. Okay. That is a big restriction. You need to have played a unit, and it needs to be a unit that's not just a space unit and when they have a ground unit, and vice versa, right? So that makes it a lot more restrictive. So I think this has potential to be in niche decks, but it's not nearly as strong as something like Merciless Contest, which we have had for a little while at this point. But that is, let me zoom back out, going to be the entire list of spoilers today, guys. We went through them pretty quickly. We've got the new first orders, guys. Let me know what you think about them. I can't believe they're releasing a whole nother faction, you know, Resistance and First Order already. Like, it feels like we still need to flush out like the Republic faction. It still feels like you need to flush out some of the other factions that we have, or traits, or whatever you want to call them. And introducing like a lot of these just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, to be honest, but they are cool cards. I just don't know if they're really going to fit. Same thing applies with the Resistance cards, right? There's a lot of them that are like, okay, Resistance is important. We just don't have enough Resistance cards to make them work. And even if set 4 brings you a ton of them, the same thing happened with set 3, where like Republic Tactical Officer just doesn't work because there's not enough Republic units to really get that in. Plus, it's obviously not as good as like a Fleet Lieutenant, but just some things to think about. What do you think about First Order? Moff Gideon, is he a pretty strong card? I don't know. New leader Phasma, is she going to be an aggressive one? Hux, TIE Fighter, Triple Laser Salvo, kind of a new Wrath in the format. Ahsoka Part 2, Profundity, and Mist Hunter and Frisk. What about these guys in the space areas, generally speaking? And then fight fire with fire. All of these cards look interesting. I think there's more hope for others than they are for things like, well, unfortunately, Turbo Laser Salvo. But I could be wrong. Could be wrong. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.